start it off, my name is Kimberly Dalton. I work with NRCS as a soil conservationist. I'm in the Hackettstown office, which is located in Warren County. We service pretty much the whole northern area of the state. And I've been working for the past 10 years on organic farms. I've been a part of this organic farming community for a long time. And went to school at Rutgers for agriculture. I transitioned my career to the USDA a couple of years ago, working with NRCS, and I just really want organic growers to be aware of the programs that are available to them.
And I'm James Strehse. I'm a natural resource specialist in the Frenchtown office. We service Hunterdon, Somerset, and Union. I am also a similar background to Kimmy, have been in the organic world for 10 plus years, just started with the agency about a year ago, and similarly, really excited to get more small scale organic growers involved.
All right, so today we are here to talk about the 2024 NRCS funding opportunities. The deadlines are looming. We tried to squeeze this in as soon as we could. So sorry, it's kind of short notice, but I think it'll still be helpful to you whether you're ready to work with NRCS right now or not. So who is NRCS? So we're the Natural Resource Conservation Service. We are a branch of the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture. All of our programs are voluntary for producers, our landowners. Our mission is to deliver conservation solutions so agricultural producers can protect natural resources and feed a growing world. So as I said, we're the environmental arm of the USDA. So we came out of the Dust Bowl. So that's when it was established, was back in the 1930s. All of our topsoils were all just washing away into the ocean, and they decided we needed to do something about it. So that's when the Soil Conservation Service started. That transformed into what is now known as Natural Resource Conservation Service, because we work with more than just soil now. We work with all natural resources. We work with private landowners and operators, so that means you could also be leasing land and work with us. And we also write conservation plans to support like farm preservation, and if you need any kind of technical assistance for something else that might not be related to our programs. We, as I said, are voluntary. It's totally up to the producer to work with us. We are non-regulatory. I mean, there are rules you have to follow to work with us, and I guess we can be regulatorily within our own means, but it's not, we would never be coming out to your farm to punish you for anything. All we are trying to do is assist the growers. So we also have many planners on staff and specialists on staff. We work with engineers, soil scientists. Our planners all have to have some kind of environmental or soils background to work with farms. So, and then we also cover every county in the United States. There's even offices throughout Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. We cover it all. These are just some fun pictures of, there's an engineer, I guess, and a soil scientist and another engineer, just some representation of the technical assistance we can provide. So we have service centers throughout the whole state. There is one in Hackettstown, that's where I work out of. So we service everything that's in blue up here. In Essex, Passaic, Bergen, Hudson, there is a big urban push right now. So if you're located in any of those counties, you definitely have the ability to work with NRCS 2 on an urban farm. There's Frenchtown that services Hunterdon, Somerset, and Union. Freehold does Mercer, Middlesex, and Monmouth. Columbus, Camden, Burlington, and Ocean, Woodstown, Gloucester, and Salem, and then Vineland services Cape May, Cumberland, and Atlantic counties. And there's also the Plant Material Center down here in Cape May. And we also have a state office. I mean, they don't do as much of the customer interaction, but that's located in Hamilton Square. All right.
All right, so I don't know if we mentioned it at the start. I just want to make sure everyone knows you can put your questions into the Q&A. We're going to have a Q&A section at the end. But if you are going to work with NRCS, then we are looking at addressing resource concerns. We have what we call SWAPA, which is soil, water, air, plants, and animals. And then in addition, there's also energy and human economics. All of the different practices, all of our programs are designed around addressing these resource concerns. So soil might be soil health. So if you've got like depleting organic matter, or if you've got erosion, whether that's sheet erosion or if you're noticing gullies forming, any of those. Water quality, we have all sorts of stream projects or livestock projects addressing water quality. Air quality can be emissions or odors. When we're talking about plants, we're talking about either crops or we could be talking about forestry. We could be talking about perennial grasses, a lot of different plants, diversity, productivity, and health. Animals can be addressing wildlife or livestock. We're looking at forage balance or potentially wildlife habitat. And then we've got energy and human economics as well that are just as important, come into play. Go to the next slide, start looking at some photos. So we've got a resource concern here, pretty evident. We have this ephemeral gully forming right through the middle of this field. If we go to the next slide, then we can see what was done about it. So we've got a corn crop here that was planted on a contour to kind of guide the water down this grassed waterway you can see in the middle. Go to the next slide. This is a couple of different livestock practices that we have. There's fencing, there's a heavy use area in the background. You can see the fence is excluding the livestock from the stream. And then across the stream, we have a stream crossing, and that is just designed to assist with water quality of the stream when the livestock are going through it. Go to the next one. We've got heavy use area protection here and roofs and covers over this protected area. This is something that it is worth keeping in mind that the projects that we have through NRCS, while we're addressing resource concerns, there's the possibility that the practices that we're including might also bring up their own resource concerns. Like, for example, we've got this roof and cover here that's increasing your impervious area, which could, cause some erosion, could cause some other concerns. So that's something that we would also address through this practice. So we've got like gutters and containment systems, all sorts of stuff that come into play. All right, we go to the next slide. All right, so now we're getting into the nitty gritty of it. It's the alphabet soup of NRCS. Just want to point out, we've got all of these 3-letter acronyms. We've got 4-letter acronyms. We've got all these acronyms that come up. When you go to your local office, when you want to apply, they're not going to expect you to know all of these different acronyms or which program that you're trying to sign up for. That's our job, to hear out what your operation is and see what our programs can do for you and which ones it might make sense for you to go through. When we have these programs we're talking about here, we're talking about financial assistance programs. NRCS also offers technical assistance where we just come out and basically offer advice. But for the sake of this, we're just going to mostly focus on the financial assistance programs. So these 3 that are at the top here, EQIP, AMA, and CSP, those are all funded through the Farm Bill, and those are our largest programs. We also have the Inflation Reduction Act. It's IRA. A lot of you probably heard about that in the news. You might have gotten signups through NRCS, just like saying that we've got this. This is additional funding that we were offered through this Inflation Reduction Act. But it's brand new, just passed in Congress in 2023. It's a separate fund pool, but it's still implemented through EQIP and CSP. So when you are signing up, you don't have to worry about designating which of these programs you're trying to work with. They have the options on our application forms, but your local office can help you figure out which you're trying to sign up for. So we've got the 2018 Farm Bill is the current Farm Bill that's funding those EQIP, AMA, and CSP. That was passed on December 11th of 2018. We're currently in the last year of that farm bill. Congress right now is working on a new farm bill that will be for the next 5-year window. And that it's some of the guidance might change when that new farm bill comes out. But for the time being, we're still in the current one. So we have a cost share that we provide to the landowner for practices that are implemented. So our payments are based on regional averages. They change year to year. We don't currently have the 2024 funding decisions made yet, but we can at least give you approximations. And when you do go into your office and talk to your planners, they'll pretty soon have the guidance on 24 to be able to offer what those cost share rates are. Our programs run through the government fiscal year. So Devin had mentioned at the beginning that deadline for fiscal year 2024 is looming because the fiscal year is October 1st through September 30th. So our current deadline that we have that's coming up on October 20th, I know we don't have a lot of time for that one, but that's those programs are running through fiscal year 2024. So those programs typically tend to go to contract. We're planning that around April or May. That's when you could actually start beginning the work. So it's worth keeping in mind when you're signing up for our programs that it is kind of a long-term sign up window. So if you are, considering you have some stuff coming up next year, you're not even exactly sure what you might have coming up, it still might be worth it to sign up to have a planner come out and talk to you about your short-term and long-term goals to see when it might make sense to apply for actually implementing those practices. So another thing about we provide cost shares, which it's in the name cost share. So our programs don't usually cover 100% of the cost of implementation. The rates are set for each fiscal year and they can't be changed. So we pay sometimes based on acreage. It depends on the practice, but they are set rates that, that's what you're set to when you sign up for our programs. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, all of our programs are designed to address environmental resource concerns. So we would have a site visit where we would come out, we would do an environmental assessment. You would kind of point out what the resource concerns are that you're concerned about that you would like to address, and we can kind of come up with a conservation plan to address those resource concerns from that SWAPA perspective. Yeah, so either if you have practices that you're interested in, you already know about, then you could bring them up. The planner will also have a whole textbook of different practices that we understand and can bring to the table and see what might work for your operation. So we have a link here to the field office technical guide. I'm going to pass it over to Kimmy because she's got control and she'll talk to you about the field office technical guide a bit. We'll see if we can get it to come up.
Can you see it, James?
It's still on the slide right now.
Oh, okay. Oh, you know what? I might have selected it so it only picks the slide. Let me see if I can get it to share. Just give me 1 second, everybody. I know I can do this. All right. I think we should be able to see it now. James, yeah, okay.
You're good.
So you can
So
see it.
this link is to the field office technical guide. This is what we use to look at any of our practice standards. And there's a whole bunch of different resources on here. I'm not going to go too in depth, but the most important thing to know is that this is available to the public. Like anyone can go on here and look at this. You would go to NRCS the main website, or you could probably just Google ePhotog and it would bring you to this. And I should have started from the beginning, honestly, because you can select your state. I had New Jersey selected, but every state is on here. Every state has different standards that apply to them. They're not all universal. A lot of them are the same, but they can be different. But you can go right to New Jersey and look at the standards that we work with. If you go to section 4, the practice standards and supporting documents, that's where you're gonna find all of our conservation practice standards. So if you do this little drop down here, standards and support documents, this lists all of the standards that we work with in New Jersey. Now, this is a technical guide, so not every single one of these is going to necessarily be a cost share, but it would still give you kind of the idea of what standard you might have to follow if you want to implement this on your farm. But this is basically, what our practice schedule is built off of when the state develops their practices each year for what we're going to cost share on. So I just thought this was a useful tool for everyone to know that's aware that you can look up some of this technical assistance yourself and, kind of get an idea of what you might want to work with when you contact us, just from looking at our standards before you contact us. And then, as I said, there are a couple other great resources on ePhotog. Just there's, kind of like there's some different types of maps with soils, climatic data, cultural resource information. This is all stuff that we work with when we're developing a conservation plan for you, and it is available for y'all to look at. I think I have to swap out the screen again real quick.
All right. So I had mentioned before the changes with the Farm Bill. So there's changes in guidance with the new Farm Bill. And then those financial assistance programs apply to private land and leased land. And in certain instances, they can also apply to public land. And as Kimmy had mentioned before, it's not restricted to landowners. If a farmer has control of the land, then they can sign up for financial assistance. We can get farm records established that show that you're the operator. And then as long as you have control of the land, then you can just get signed approval from the landowner and you can have the financial assistance in your name. It is eligible for agricultural producers, so you should be involved in the production of the agricultural commodities that are being part of the operation. If you are on public land and you, the producer, have control, and it is a part of an agricultural production, and the practices are necessary to address identified resource concerns, then that public land also qualifies for the programs. If you have questions about your specific land's eligibility, then your NRCS office or your FSA office will be able to help. The last point here is that these are competitive programs. Funding is not guaranteed. Just to give a basic overview of the process, once you apply, we would come out and have a site visit with you where we look at what you are interested in, what the resource concerns are that you want to address. We would come up with a tentative conservation plan. Then you would go in through an environmental assessment where we look at the resource concerns that exist and the practices that are going to address them. And you're given an assessment score. All of the applications that came in are then ranked based on the scores that they get, and funds are allocated down a list. We have different fund pools, so I'll be talking about some of the opportunities later on, but it basically, once that line is cut off, that's who gets funded. So in the past, I think it has been difficult for small projects sometimes to get funded. But if you have a good project, you are getting a good environmental impact from it, then your chances are going up. And we also have different fund pools that potentially could help with that. So if we go to the next slide, we can talk about some of that. All right, so HU is historically underserved. This is a self-certified designation that you would put in your application. There's a couple of different groups here that would fall into HU. The first is beginning farmer. This is an applicant that has not operated a farm for more than 10 years. They must participate in the operation of the farm. And if you are signing up as a business, then all members of your business must meet this requirement in order to qualify. Then we got socially disadvantaged. This is for groups whose members have been subject to racial or ethnic prejudice because of their identity. It's based on a national list. So you could look up that list to see if you would fall into the socially disadvantaged group. And if you're signing up as a business, then only 50% of the members must qualify to get the HU designation for that one. Limited resource is direct or indirect gross farm sales are not more than the current indexed value in each of the previous 2 years. So that value changes year to year. So I haven't listed it here, but another point would be that like if the applicant's total household income is at or below the national poverty level, and less than 50% of the county's median household income, then in each of the previous 2 years, then they would qualify for limited resource. And for entities, 100% of the business members need to qualify. And finally, we've got veteran. This is for producers who served in the United States Army, the Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, or Coast Guard, including the reserve component. In order to qualify for this HU qualification, they first have to have obtained their veteran status during the last 10 years or have not operated a farm for more than 10 years. One additional thing for veterans is that your priority screening is high. So when your application is screened, basically you just like get an extra point towards getting a greater chance of getting funded for being a veteran. And if you are signing up as a business, then 100% of the members need to be veterans in order to qualify. The nice thing about the HU qualification is that there are more opportunities. There's additional fund pool options for some of these groups, and there's also higher payment rates. So we have HU rates that are just higher than our standard rates of cost share. You could also, if you are HU and you are signing up for EQIP, then you could get an advance payment, which is basically upfront, you would get 50% of the practice cost share, and then you would get the additional 50% when the practice is completely implemented. There's a couple of caveats that go along with the advance payments, so it would be really important that you talk to your local NRCS planner to make sure that that's something that you would be interested in doing. All right.
Right, I'm gonna take over again. I'm gonna kind of break down some of the initiatives that are out there right now for FY 2024. For so environmental quality incentive programs is pretty much the biggest program that we work with. It's addressing the resource concerns as James has already mentioned. For 2024, we're working with $8 million that's been allocated to us. So that's through regular farm bill. Typically we're looking at 6 or 7 million from just the regular farm bill. So right off the bat, just our regular farm bill money is a little bit more than it normally is. It provides generally 60 to 90% cost share on the practices. All of our practices have set cost rates. So if you are implementing a practice, whether you hire someone to install it versus doing it yourself, it's the same cost rate. We have different scenarios we can work with that have different cost rates also. But I just wanted you to be aware that if it doesn't change based off of if you're gonna like hire someone else to install the project for you or not. And that's why the percentage can vary on what it covers, because for some it can cover more because you might be doing all the work yourself, while others might need to pay a little bit more out of pocket depending on the means they have to install something or complete a practice. So EQIP has a heavy agricultural focus, do a lot of work with livestock. Typically livestock, it's working with either the HUAPs for water quality. So that's a heavy use area protection, where we saw those livestock in the covered area that's, protecting the pastures in the winter time. It can be implementing a grazing plan for pasture health and productivity. That's where fencing comes into play. We don't just pay for fencing. You have to be following a written grazing plan that you have signed on to, and that's when we can implement fencing in order for you to rotationally graze your animals. We clearly do a lot of work with cropland, big push with cover crop this year. High tunnel would be considered cropland too. That's for plant productivity and health. You know, we do stuff with irrigation. We do a lot of work with forestry now too, addressing the health of the forest, plant productivity and health again in the forest. That includes removal of invasives, timber harvest to manage the forest so it's growing at a healthy stocking rate. Even put in wildlife habitat like bird boxes or like shelters within the forest. And then also there's other wildlife that we work with. We have a couple different initiatives for endangered species. The bog turtle is a big one up in Northeast New Jersey. Also the golden wing warbler down south, they have some work with quail. And I guess I'm kind of going into the special initiatives already, but you know, we have an initiative with energy. As most of you know, there is an organic initiative. There is a fund pool every year just for organic applicants. You self-certify on your application, whether you're certified organic or transitioning, or I think even one of them kind of says like, we're going to transition. And as long as you self-certify in that you are one of those three, you are eligible to be ranked in that organic fund pool. In the past, the organic fund pool hasn't been huge, but it might grow with the more interest that there is in it. So that is why it's also very important to have organic growers participate with our programs to show the interest in the use of them. There's also the seasonal high tunnel. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that or have heard of that. So we do pay on high tunnels that are for the plant productivity and health. So you do have to be planting right into the soil profile. It can't be used as a greenhouse and it can't be used for any other purpose. It is solely for producing crops in. There is no cap on how many high tunnels you can apply for also. High tunnel fund pool has always been pretty competitive. You know, they don't always fund all the projects, but as James had mentioned before, the more resources that you can be addressing on your property or, you know, just the higher that you could rank and have the potential of being funded for a high tunnel. So I feel like a lot of high tunnels don't always get funded because all they're doing is a high tunnel, but you know, maybe you have other resource concerns on your property to address as well, in addition to the high tunnel. So that's something to think about when you go into an application with us. We're not just giving out high tunnels pretty much. So there's also working lands for wildlife. So there's a couple different initiatives for different, as I said, endangered species that is specific money set aside for. Now we have the big urban initiative. And another notice that you've probably received is for the tree mortality initiative. We are working with producers now to remove the dying ash trees in their hedgerows and along fence fields. And we're going to also be replanting those trees. That is the one caveat to working with that, is that we are going to assist with removing them, but we also have to be planting trees where we're going to be removing them. And then also we do work with conservation planning activity plans. So we cost share on forest stewardship plans, energy audits, comprehensive nutrient management plans, organic transitioning plans. So that's, if you apply for any of those activities, you would work with a TSP, which is a technical service provider. We have a whole list of certified technical service providers for all these different activities. And we would direct you to work with them. You would select from the list who you want to work with, and they would be writing the plan for you that we would then cost share on. And a lot of these plans are stepping stones to being eligible for other implementation activities with us, or they could just, you know, assist you outside of the work that we do as well. So a lot, you know, you've been hearing a lot about this Inflation Reduction Act. It is, so if you've seen any of the press releases about it and the money that's coming to farmers, this is additional money to our regular farm bill. So New Jersey for FY24 is receiving $11 million to work with through NRCS. So put in perspective, typically we only get the 7 million out of regular farm bill. So now we are also getting an additional 11 million. So we basically have doubled the money that we're working with this year, and have been told that it's just expected to grow every single year through, I think it's the next 5 years. There's 19.5 billion to work with over the next 5 years nationally. So the slogan on this is once in a generation investment in conservation on working lands. And it's part of President Biden's Investing in America agenda. So when you, if you apply to our programs, it is up to your planner what different fund pools you get ranked in. You don't have to submit a different application for IRA versus regular farm bill. You just submit one application, and it's all on our end to figure out where that funding comes from. The Inflation Reduction Act has a very specific list of practices that we are able to use. So basically, if you are applying for a practice on the list, we will be working with IRA funding. I have a link set up here too to open up that list for you. So I'm going to have to swap out my screen again and show that to you. So just give me 1 second. And this is also something that can be seen on the NRCS website. So this is, just give me a nod, James, if you can see this.
Yeah, we can. Could you zoom it in a bit?
Yes. No, that's not what I meant to do. Okay, sorry, it was covered up by the Zoom thing. All right, so this is the list that they put out for FY 2024 of the climate smart agricultural and forestry mitigation activities. So anything on this list is eligible for the IRA funding. So these are our regular practices here, the conservation practice standards, and the regular codes, which are just these 3 digits. All of these over here, the enhancements, they have to do with another program that we have, CSP, which is Conservation Stewardship Program. CSP, we're not going to go into because we just wanted to go into the basics of what is available to you. CSP is available too, but basically CSP is for folks that have done a bunch of work addressing resource concerns, and then they're eligible for CSP. But you know, if you have done a bunch of work with NRCS in the past, you could be eligible. You don't even have to do a bunch of work with NRCS to be eligible for CSP, but you do have to have pretty much all of your resource concerns addressed already. But so there are, you know, different practices associated with the different mitigation categories. So soil health, cover crops, a big one. Grass waterways, filter strips, nutrient management. There are quite a few practices with livestock as well. There is also pasture and hay planting, so that could support a grazing plan if you're a livestock producer. And fence is not technically on this list, but that could be seen as a supporting practice to your pasture seeding. If that ends up being something that you're interested in, you could still qualify for this funding. Yeah, so there's, you know, just this full list, and can only be used for IRA. So like one thing you'll see on here is that high tunnel is not a climate mitigation practice. That's going to come out of our regular equip. But you know, as we go through the application process in the office, we figure out, you know, everything that you would qualify for in different fund pools. So I'm going to switch back to the slideshow. All right, and then another initiative that is newer, it was new as of last year. We did do a little work with it for FY23, and it's still available FY24, is the Organic Transition Initiative, OTI. So this is an effort to support transition to organic. So basically any, farm that wants to transition from conventional to organic would be eligible. If you are already an organic grower and you have land that you need to transition, that land could also be eligible for the Organic Transition Initiative. So there is 300 million multi-agency throughout the USDA effort to support this transition. As I said, eligible producers are either beginning to transition or already in the process of transitioning. It does require an organic systems plan in order to be eligible. That is one of the conservation planning activities that we do cost share on. So you could work with us to get a organic systems plan written, but it can also be something that you wrote yourselves for your own certification, and it could be used to make you eligible for this initiative. When working with the Organic Transition Initiative, there is a new practice, the organic management practice, that is required to be contracted as well. And James is going to go into that a little bit next. But this Organic Transition Initiative is just like the other programs, where if we know that you're going to be a good fit when you apply and we do our initial site visit with you, we know that we will put you in that fund pool. And this is probably a fund pool that not a lot of folks are gonna fall into that category. So, funding is just that much easier if you since it's just not as competitive. But it's all on our end, judging what fits you best. All right, I think James is gonna take over here.
All right, back to me. Yeah, so organic management practice. This is a new, what we call an interim practice with NRCS. So it's being tested out for a 3-year period to determine whether we want to permanently add it to the practice catalog. That means it's a really good time to get in on this project for 2 reasons. One, might not be here 3 years from now. 2, the more people who want this organic management practice, the more that signals nationally to NRCS that this is something that we want to have offered for organic producers. As Kimmy had mentioned, it is a practice that's required if you're working through the Organic Transition Initiative program. However, it can also be used by certified organic producers. So if you're already certified, you can just go through, whether it be EQIP or another program of ours, and basically what this practice is doing is following the general requirements of your organic systems plan. So if you're already following an organic systems plan, you're already certified, then you're half the way there to already meeting the requirements for this practice. It is a 3 to 5 year management practice. We recommend the timeline to be 5 years for the contract, but if you're new to NRCS, you're not necessarily interested in immediately signing up for a 5-year program. It can be a 3-year program. It could even be less than that if you want it to be, but it's paid annually. So it would be at the end of each year, we would get some records from you showing that you followed the standards of the organic management practice. And you would get this annual payment, and it's based on the acreage of your operation. And this supports conservation activities and practices required for organic certification. So if you're interested in this practice, then you would have your planner come out. They would see what resource concerns are on the property, and they would help you to develop a plan. And based on a lot of it's already based on just what is required for organic certification. and you would come up with the standards that we're requiring for you to follow to meet this practice. There's a couple of requirements involved. A lot of the time, so if you're transitioning to organic, I know a lot of the time you wait until the 3rd year to get involved with an organic certifier. With this practice, we do require you to work with an organic certifier for the full 3-year management, even if you're transitioning. And the reasoning for that is basically that we just want to make sure that whether you're on the 1st year of transitioning or the 3rd year, then you're still meeting that organic systems plan already, and you're already following organic management. You must also follow all National Organic Program standards. And if you're organic, you're already doing this. You have to have an up-to-date organic systems plan, and you have to maintain the records related to that plan to ensure that they're being followed. A couple of the records that we would require are following a planned nutrient management system and also following a specific crop rotation. So we would look at those records at the end of the year just to make sure that you applied your amendments the way that you would for an organic system and that the crop rotation is following that system. There's also additional requirements depending on those resource concerns that the planner addresses when they come out. So for example, if you are looking at improving your soil health, there might be specific standards related to that. There might be specific requirements if you're doing it for pest pressure or additional other options for resource concerns. But whatever they may be, we have supporting practices that we planned alongside them potentially to, which I'll discuss on the next slide, that would assist with the implementation of this management system. The last point about this is that the payments may provide foregone income reimbursement, and that's reimbursement for anticipated losses associated with organic production. It only covers certain crops, and it's based on a list that's determined state by state. So for example, like if you have strawberries, then strawberries might qualify for foregone income where maybe tomatoes don't. But if you have like large patches of something that does fall into the foregone income list, then you could have part of the practice go towards that reimbursement, and it would only qualify for the acreage that's being farmed in those foregone income crops. All right, so we go to the next slide and talk about, these are some other common practices. So these can be used with organic management, or they can also be used on their own. And Kimmy touched on a couple of these before, but I'll just go through. The high tunnel system, as Kimmy mentioned, it's a high tunnel, not a greenhouse. So you would be planting directly into the ground. You also must be purchasing and building it based on a manufacturer's kit. So you can't kind of piecemeal pieces together and build it yourself. It needs to be based off of a pre-existing kit. They can be any length, but they must be at least 6 feet tall to meet the requirements for a high tunnel. We also have the low tunnel system. This is another interim practice. And I know a lot of folks might think of low tunnels and think of like caterpillars, but this low tunnel system practice actually qualifies a lot of different low tunnel systems. For our purposes, a low tunnel can be hoops with row cover on them. It can be in mesh insect netting, like protect net style netting for pest prevention. It can also be plastic for warmth, or whatever you might have. It can be hooped, it can be floating row cover. It just needs to be under 4 feet. So a lot of systems might be using low tunnels or want to try out different low tunnel systems, and we can help cost share on that. Cover crops is a big one too. It's worth keeping in mind. I think a lot of folks might have heard that the cover crop rate is based on acreage, and it might not necessarily make sense to do it on a small scale, but we also have a small scale payment rate available for cover crops. So if you do have a small footprint, it still might make sense for you to do that. And that's true for a lot of our practices, that we have these small scale payment rates available. A couple of other options. We've got reduced tillage management. This is referring to either reduced till or no till. We got conservation crop rotation. The standards for this one can be a little bit tricky. There's some intensive record keeping that might need to happen for diversified vegetable operations in order to meet this. But for simpler rotations, if you aren't farming necessarily diversified vegetables, or if you just happen to be an intensive record keeper, then this could still be a good option for you. Next one we've got is contour farming. So that would be a planner could come out and assist with charting the contour of your farm, and you would till your beds and plant on this contour to assist with erosion and plant cover. Soil carbon amendment. This is for the application of carbon-based amendments derived from plant materials or animal byproducts. So this is referring to compost, biochar, manure, any bio-related amendment that you're putting on could fall into that soil carbon amendment. Then we've got combustion system improvement. This is used to replace, repower, or retrofit agricultural combustion systems. So this basically applies to existing in-use systems that can be stationary, it could be portable, it could be self-propelled units. You could have a forklift, a tractor. That the goal of this is to replace an inefficient agricultural system with a more energy efficient. So the goal is to reduce emissions, reduce energy use by increasing the efficiency of that piece of equipment. One caveat that you should keep in mind if you're interested in this system is that the old equipment must be dismantled and destroyed. You cannot continue to use whatever the goal is to replace it. So that's the combustion system improvement. Then we've also got a lot of practices that apply to livestock, and I know Kimmy went over some of these too. So we've got fencing, prescribed grazing, pasture and hay planting, a lot of the livestock systems, we would come up with a grazing plan for you, and you're following that grazing plan, and a lot of these practices would be used to support that grazing plan. Silvopasture is on here at the end. That is referring to essentially having your livestock have access to partially forested land. That qualifies for areas that are under 50% canopy cover, where there's an understory of forage as part of that. In addition to livestock practices, we've also got wildlife and forestry practices. This could be conservation cover, which is referring to establishing permanent vegetative cover. It could be for erosion control. It can also be for wildlife habitat. Then we've got tree shrub plantings. This is a generalized practice. We also have a number of more specialized planting options, like we've got riparian forest buffer plantings or alley cropping. And something that Kimmy had noted earlier is that tree mortality incentive, where that program that's designed to address tree mortality, whether it be from ash borers or another environmental issue, it requires a mandatory replanting of tree and shrub. So that practice would fall in there. Then alley cropping is referring to growing trees or shrubs in aisleways alongside vegetative crops or forages. So it's basically like multi-story cropping. All right, and we can go to the next slide. We've got some pictures of some of these practices in action. So there we've got a high tunnel. And again, this was made based on a kit. So it's something that's purchased. You can build it yourself, but you just have to build it according to the manufacturer's instructions. Go to the next one. We've got some fencing here. Go to the next one. All right, yeah, so here we've got irrigation. Irrigation isn't something that was mentioned in the common practices, just because for a small scale or a vegetable operation, a lot of organic systems, the standards of the organic or of the irrigation system are pretty stringent, so it can be hard to qualify and meet eligibility for this practice. But if you are interested in doing irrigation, then you just need to already have been irrigating for 2 years with some sort of system, and then the irrigation system practice would be used to increase the efficiency of that system. We can go to the next one. All right, now we got more livestock. So you can see the fencing there. They probably had a pasture and hay planting, and this is going towards a prescribed grazing system.
And something to note on livestock is that we don't work with poultry necessarily. It's pretty much anything that has 4 legs that we work with in terms of developing a grazing system and paying for fencing on.
Yeah, and one other thing to mention with fencing before we move on is just that in order to qualify for getting fencing, it needs to be again, as we mentioned, that prescribed grazing, that grazing plan that you're following, it needs to be supporting that. So we could do the expansion of fencing related to that prescribed grazing plan or internal fencing to break up a pasture. But we are not able to replace existing fencing that is currently working to contain animals. So it's not a means of replacing your fence. And then here we've got some forest land. So we've got forest practices that could come into play here. Could get tree and shrub plantings or maybe brush management to control some invasives. Go to the next slide. We can see some tree plantings in action. So you can see your tree tubes, that's some deer protection. You've also got mulching around the trees just to help with cutting back on weed pressure. And we can go to the next one. We've got some wildlife practices. You can see our structures for wildlife, a bird box. And we've got a couple of different types of bird boxes and as well as brush piles for wildlife. Then you can see stream projects. So we have stream enhancement for water quality or for fish populations and for habitat. Go to the next one. I'm sure plenty of you probably know this bird. We got a golden winged warbler. And as Kimmy had mentioned before, we have the working lands for wildlife that are specific fund pools specifically for target species. So the golden winged warbler is one of those species.
And for working with like wildlife species like that, if it's something you're interested in on your property, that is like, we check the endangered and threatened species map for any property that we work with to, make sure we wouldn't be harming anything, or, if you are a hit in that area, we let you know. And if we're going to do forestry work with you, hey, you're in the golden wing warbler area, maybe you want to work with the golden wing warbler to support their habitat. So that's also something, it might be something you hear of and you're interested in, or it could be something we end up making you aware of that you weren't aware of.
All right, and here we've got some conservation cover. So we got some perennial cover, again, can be used for wildlife habitat, can also be used for soil health, erosion control. Lots of great things with conservation cover. All right, back to you, Kimmy.
Yeah, so we're pretty close to the end here, so we can get to some questions, but I just wanted to mention real quick our sister agency, Farm Service Agency. They are who sets up the farm records for any of our NRCS customers and deals with any of the eligibility paperwork that comes along with the application. Applying for our programs isn't just filling out the application and submitting it to us. There's actually quite a bit of what seems like overwhelming paperwork that you also have to fill out. But if you work with the folks over at Farm Service Agency, they are very helpful and they know what you need to do. Sometimes it's easiest, rather than trying to fill out the forms yourself, to call your local office and have them talk you through it, or even just go visit your local office and sit down with someone. We're basically always available. So during business hours, 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. But they do a lot for us and are a very important part of what we do. Also, they are who you would report any acreage to. You're not required for NRCS programs to report your acreage, but it can be helpful if everyone reported acreage. A lot of how programs are developed are actually based off of acreage reporting. The more they see that there's these small vegetable growers, the more that they might put more farm bill programs towards assisting, or, not just vegetable, it could be your pasture, could be your corn and soy. But as much as you think it can be a pain in the butt, especially on a small scale, but it can be very helpful to how programs are developed. So it's something definitely to keep in mind. And then lastly, our deadlines. So currently, our deadline for FY24 for our regular Farm Bill programs, including some of the IRA funding, is October 20th, which is this Friday. we ideally wanted to do this webinar a while back, but we had a looming government shutdown, so we kind of waited on it because we honestly weren't sure if we were going to be working in the first 2 weeks of October. So sorry, this is so short notice, but everyone's in the office all day, every day this week, pretty much. So if you want to apply, you can either call your office and schedule a time to come in, or most offices are happy to email you the application and any of the eligibility paperwork. And as long as you get it in before October 20th or have it dated and in the mail by October 20th, you would be meeting the deadline. There is also Cover Crop Act Now that has also been announced. So Act Now is a newer thing with NRCS where they are trying to develop a quicker turnaround to contracts. So basically, if a practice falls into an Act Now category, once again, your planner will be aware, and you do in the Act Now scenario have technically a choice if you really want the contract to move faster or not. You know, most folks that's what they would want. But once we have the Act Now is announced, we know anyone that applied for cover crop could fall into the Act Now category. And basically our ranking deadline and the development of the contract has to move that much faster for the participant. I don't really have any of the numbers of days of how quickly it has to move yet. This is all still very new. But the Cover Crop Act Now is going to be a deadline of November 17th. So if you're applying for just cover crop, you do have a little bit of extra time. And something I wanted to mention on cover crop that hasn't been in the past is that you can reapply for cover crop on the same land. Even if you've implemented cover crop in the past. It's always been a rule that you couldn't come back again to do it, but now they've lifted that rule and you'll be able to do it starting at 5/24. There is going to be more Act Nows to come. They're talking about doing the tree mortality initiative as an Act Now and possibly doing the high tunnel as an Act Now, but it hasn't been advertised yet. And then as I mentioned briefly, the CSP program, that deadline for applications is going to be March 29th, so it's a little different. And we also do accept applications year round. So if you didn't turn one in for FY24, anytime during the year you could turn one in and we would look at it next year, or if maybe something else comes up before the next funding round, it could be looked at. So even if you miss a deadline, it doesn't hurt to put an application in. And here's just a slide with all the phone numbers of the different offices, whichever one would fit where your location is. And now let's get to questions. I know we're already at the our end of our time. I hope it's okay if we take a little bit more time to answer questions.
Yeah, thanks, Kimmy. Thank you, James. Good thorough rundown of all that NRCS is offering. Sometimes it's almost too much. There's so many offerings. We have a couple questions in the chat, and one of them pertains to just the prerequisites for assistance from NRCS. So can you talk about any of the barriers, if there are any, that would prevent somebody from being eligible? For example, do you have to be farmland assessed? Do you have to already have a conservation plan in existence? Do you do work on publicly owned land if you're working with an institution? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can answer this one, James, if you want. So you do not need to be farmland assessed. As I mentioned, we work with private landowners. You can be leasing the land. And you don't have to already have a conservation plan. Most likely we're going to be developing a conservation plan with you. Well, we definitely will be developing a conservation plan. So I guess one of the biggest barriers I've seen is landowner concurrence. So if you're leasing land and you are implementing like a structural practice, so not our management practices, not like cover crop, not residue and no-till, but like, let's say you want to install a high tunnel or do a tree and shrub planting, you are required to have the landowner sign off that they are okay with those practices being implemented. We also, you do have to have a lease in order to set up that record with Farm Service Agency that you're operating on that ground. The lease doesn't necessarily always have to be the length of the lifespan of a practice, but that you definitely have to be able to get the landowner to sign off on that landowner concurrence. Otherwise, the other biggest thing is that you can't make over $900,000 a year and be eligible for USDA programs. So that's one of the forms that you certify to when you sign up. That's not an issue for most of us, but it does happen. So
That's good to know. So at the least, if someone's interested, but they don't know where to go, first step would be signing up with their FSA office to get the farm ID and get in the system, do the initial paperwork, right?
yeah.
And then reach out and get the conservation plan taken care of. And then that opens up all the doors.
Yeah, basically, if you already know you want to apply for NRCS, it's coming into in either FSA or our office. Most of our offices, FSA and NRCS, are right next door to each other. I think in New Jersey they are all that way. I know in some other states they might not be, but it's just a matter of coming in, saying you want to apply to work with our programs. Usually we sit down with you, have you fill out your NRCS application, and then we'll bring you next door and have you work with Farm Service Agency. Or this can all happen over the email and telephone. Personally, I find it much easier if you just come into the office. COVID, we worked solely through email and phone, and it worked, but I'm kind of over it, and I'd rather you just come into the office and have a conversation with us, because that's how we figure out what you want to work with just that much better. If we just send you an application, you just write, I want, this, that, and the third, and we really don't know much about you at that point. And it's a lot easier to figure out who in our office might be the best planner for you to work with. Because we all as planners have our own specialties. Like James and I both have organic backgrounds and we're in 2 different offices. We have wildlife specialists. We have folks that work with like the big grain producers more often, livestock producers more often. So it's just easier to find, navigate how it all works if we meet with you in the office.
Absolutely. That makes sense. So from what I recall, NRCS used to fund, or at least cost share, for deer fencing. I don't believe that's a thing anymore, correct?
You want me to get this one, Kimmy?
Sure.
So we do not cost share for deer fencing for exclusion on cropland or livestock. The only area where we will assist with exclusion fencing is if you are doing it for forest regeneration. So our reasoning for that is that, again, we are addressing resource concerns. And if you consider deer wildlife, we don't want to do wildlife exclusion. That's not really, a good resource practice. But if you are trying to regenerate forest land with some plantings, then we can put deer fencing around that.
What about any alternatives like slash fencing or any kind of plantings to deter wildlife from your production fields? Is there anything available in that regard?
You go ahead, Kimmy.
Oh, I don't believe we have any scenarios yet for doing any type of slash fencing. I think they actually very recently went to a different state to look into that idea, but it's not officially a part of our practice scenarios. I also did want to mention that if you're looking for deer fencing assistance, we usually direct you to the state. There is the programs for preserved land and now non-preserved land. And as a part of our job in the office, we do, if we don't have the answer or aren't the answer for what you're looking for, we do direct you to who we would best think is the answer. So, we get calls all the time about the deer fencing, and we give them the phone number for the person that works with deer fencing at the state.
Perfect. Mark asks, is there cost share for solar system installed on farmland?
Yeah, Kimmy, do you know, do we do solar? I know we can help with energy plans to, like one of
Um,
those.
I don't
Good.
know a lot about the solar. There are situations like if you wanted to use solar for to power a well or to electrify a fence. I think that there are situations where we have scenarios where solar could power certain practices pretty much. Other than that, I haven't really worked with much solar. That doesn't mean it's a total no on that. I just don't know a lot about it yet.
Yeah, Mark, I would check out the REAP program. I'm not sure about the fine points on that, but I know some farmers that have used that with good results. Maria is asking, how does NRCS interface with cooperative extension?
Yeah, so I would say we don't necessarily interface directly with cooperative extension. The extension is a really good resource for when folks are first starting out. And a lot of the time, when folks are just getting their farm set up, their NRCS financial assistance isn't necessarily like great for that initial startup. So we'll usually direct people to cooperative extension at this point, at that point.
Can you talk about post-project monitoring and verification and what that looks like? So if a producer does get funding, cost share or reimbursement, whatever the case, what does the process look like to ensure that they had implemented that correctly, that everything was done according to the plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing would be that we come out and do a site visit. We either immediately after or sometimes depending on the practice even we'll have like pre-construction meetings to make sure that you understand the design. We provide designs and what we call job sheets for every practice to make sure you know what you're supposed to do. We would come out after it's installed and check it out, do an inspection, make sure that it's meeting our standards. And then that is the point where a payment would be issued on that practice. Then from there, every practice has its own lifespan. If it's some practices that are management style, like cover crop, that's just a 1-year lifespan. There's others like high tunnel, I believe is a 5-year lifespan, and other structural ones will have their own. And we have our own operations and maintenance schedule that you are, agreeing to follow if you are signing up with us and getting a cost share, where we'll have additional maintenance requirements for each practice that you're expected to maintain that practice for its lifespan.
Now, I've got something maybe a little left field here, but just like any other aspect of agriculture and advocacy, there are ways to influence what goes on with NRCS funding, correct? Through local working groups.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about that and how farmers can plug in and actually, influence and inform what they need, carry it up the chain to the Fed, and make sure that we're moving towards getting, what we really need here in Jersey, as opposed to what, the federal government thinks we need? Can you talk about how a producer might plug into some of that?
Yeah, I will try to. James, I might need your help a little bit too, if you know a little bit more. But as you said, the local working group. So I think we're required to actually set them up annually, and usually there are different focuses to each local working group. And every office is required to do them throughout the state. Like I know last year our office did one in an urban setting, and basically I don't really know how they did the outreach and the advertisement for it, but anyone in like that wanted to learn more about urban and where they wanted to see NRCS work with urban could come to the local working group and voice their concerns and voice their questions about how to work with NRCS. I mean, I think it's also as simple as talking to your congressman and voicing, what you believe is required. they are, rewriting the farm bill right now. We're going to be working with a new farm bill for the next 5 years after this year. So this is the time to definitely get the word in and try to make the influence on how the farm bill is written and what our, what the USDA funding is used for. That's all about all I have in experience on that thus far.
Yeah, no, I think that was good, Kimmy. The only thing I might mention is just like going to your local like county board of ag meetings is a great option. There can be NRCS representation, or just like there's some interagency conversation that happens. So the more you get involved and vocalize locally what you are interested in seeing happen, the more likely it is that we're going to hear about it. And as Kimmy has mentioned before, if you do report your acreage and report your crops, then that's another way that we again are getting that that picture of who's out there, who's farming, and what their needs might be.
Yeah, and to tap on the Board of Ag meetings, that is a great place to bring up these topics. And every Board of Ag, they send representatives to like the Farm Bureau Convention every year, where they talk about or what the farmers want. And if you're getting your voice into the Board of Ag meetings, then your voice could be carried further to for example, the Farm Bureau Convention. And they're their own organization, but they definitely do make some headway on how the farm bill is written and stand up for what farmers want.
And if anybody has trouble finding out when their county board meets and where, feel free to give any of us an email. We'd be happy to help link you up, because sometimes it can be a little cryptic finding out how to get involved. Seeing no more questions in the chat, I just want to go back to Mark's comment earlier. If this slideshow could be shared at some point, could we make that possible?
Oh yeah. Mhm.
Cool. So
Yeah,
we
I'll
could share
send it
that.
to you, Devin, and whatever you do.
That'd be perfect. Yeah, I'll share everything, and any other attachments or information you have for the group. Happy to forward that along. But seeing no other questions, any final comments, any last words? We really appreciate you being here and sharing all this with us. Any last thoughts?
I think one
Yeah.
thing I'll say is that, if anyone ever thinks of something else that they want NRCS to really present on in terms of our programs and what they could use assistance with, we're always open to more outreach and more ideas. So,
Yep, I was pretty much going to say the same. Yeah, we love to hear from you, and think both of us are really interested in having more, whether it be webinar or just events. NOFA is a great resource to plug into, so we're both happy to have been here. And thank you, Devin, for setting this up for us.
Cool.
yeah.
Well, we appreciate your time and appreciate everybody joining us. Have a good night, y'all.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you.